Awesome. So again, I'm Mike Stewart, one of the devs on the Salesforce team. As Dave mentioned, super informal, so I do have an outline, but jump in, interrupt at any time, ask questions, kind of just doing this on the fly. Really quickly, just to prove that there's no smoke and mirrors, I'm actually going to create an entirely new Salesforce environment and do this entire demo from the ground up in a new environment. So it's all cloud-based. We got developer.force.com as kind of the developer entry zone. You can always create free Salesforce environments. They're kind of limited in storage and stuff like that, but it allows you to build Salesforce applications. Just anyone can do this. So I'm actually going to get one of these started right now. It does take sometimes a couple minutes to spin up, so I'm going to kind of get that kicked off, and then I'll do a more formal intro here. Again, anyone can do this entirely on the cloud. I'm going to just create a username here. .demo. I don't think I've used that username in the past. Hopefully that'll spin up. So it should be procuring a new Salesforce environment. It'll send me an email when it's ready. Like I said, it should be within a minute or so. I'm going to try to mirror this demo off of a favorite video of mine, which is DHH, the creator of Ruby on Rails, or the Rails framework, did a pretty famous 15-minute video on spinning up a blog on Rails. I think it's pretty funny. He's very animated. And here's him just starting a blog. So it's a pretty cool video. It's 15 minutes long. He creates a blog from scratch in Rails. And I kind of use that as a starting point for what I'm going to show in Salesforce. So I'm going to kind of run through an exercise, creating maybe a blog, maybe have some comments, showing creating objects, creating layouts, really doing everything from the ground up. That being said, Salesforce kind of started as a CRM. So what it got famous for is customer relationship management, salespeople tracking accounts, leads, contacts, sales. But it really has evolved into a platform as a service. So while an out-of-the-box install of Salesforce isn't going to know anything about blogs or comments, we can really quickly and easily configure Salesforce to be able to support something like that. And actually here at Expedia, we leverage a lot of the standard Salesforce functionality. Case management is key, but we also have financial information and stuff that's maybe not standard to Salesforce. And so again, I'm going to show kind of how we get that started. It also has a very robust ecosystem. So there's the App Exchange for Salesforce. This is really similar to like the iOS App Store or Google Play Android Store, where any company, any developer can actually publish apps to this app store. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, but you can install them into your particular instance of Salesforce just with the click of a button. So here are some of the more popular ones. You can see major companies, GoToMeeting, Evernote, Dropbox, Box. There's a ton of integrations built with Salesforce. Likewise, there's a ton of open source code. So if we do just a simple search for Salesforce on GitHub, tons of repos. Twilio has a great library. Amazon AWS has some great libraries. Similar to most other programming languages, a lot of libraries out there where you're not necessarily needing to reinvent the wheel. You can just take these code and run with it. And finally, Twitter. There's a big following of Salesforce on Twitter. There's a hashtag AskForce where developers and administrators are trying to look for suggestions. And here we can see just today, and really just in the last hour, a ton of posts asking questions normally get answered really quickly. So it's a pretty good ecosystem. A lot of people out there. Basically, every major company is using Salesforce: Google, Amazon, Expedia, Nike, Dell. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so there's constantly people pushing the limits, building new things, demoing new things, and it's really an ecosystem that I really like to be a part of. So that being said, it looks like the org did get spun up here. I'm just going to go ahead and log into it really quickly. As you'll see here, the platform handles everything security. So it's going to manage passwords and all that fun stuff so that us as developers don't need to do that. Let me just create a sample password there. So security is really handled behind the scenes. And in fact, all of the real operations is handled behind the scenes. We don't have a DevOps team. We don't have people that are needing to manage databases, manage uptime. In fact, Salesforce actually publishes their uptime on trust.salesforce.com. And you can see where all of the pods, which are collections of servers, what the uptime is, if there was an issue, how long the issue lasted for, and just how many transactions were handled. So if we look here back on February 18th, Salesforce as a platform handled 1.7 billion transactions. So they have an entire DevOps team. They're 24/7. Data centers across the world, disaster recovery, all of that stuff is entirely handled by the platform. And in fact, everything from a scalability perspective is really done on user count. So as you add users to your instance, your database storage grows. Your number of API calls grow. Basically, everything grows according to how many users you have in the system. So with that, I'm actually here in kind of the out-of-the-box Salesforce. Again, I just spun this up 30 seconds ago. You can see, again, some of the standard objects I was talking about. So accounts, contacts, opportunities. These are kind of salesy based, but we have Salesforce, and anyone, it doesn't take a developer to do this. We can go in and create a new account. All of this layout, all of this scaffolding created for us, storing it in a database. We've got data in Salesforce. And again, there's actually a lot of companies that don't have full-time Salesforce developers. And I think as you'll see here as I go through this demo, there's a lot of stuff that you can do in Salesforce without writing code. They actually have a mantra, clicks not code. And even as developers, we often say, if there's something that we can do without writing code, let's do it that way. But again, kind of basic install has some standard objects, which are just kind of the global Salesforce objects. If you talk to anyone that works in Salesforce about an account, they're going to know what that means. And all of this is created just out of the box. But that's not what we're here to do today. We're here to tell you how we can customize and configure Salesforce, and we're going to run through creating a blog. So one of the first things that we need to do is create a new object, right? Create some sort of database table. It's going to store maybe a blog post. We can do that. I'm an admin in this org, so I'm going to go into the setup menu. I can create a new object. And just like this, I'm going to add a new custom object. I'm going to call it posts. Plural name is posts. I can give it a description. I can change what the name or kind of a label of that object is. I'm going to allow reports, and I'm going to track field history. I'm going to say that this is already deployed just because it's a demo. And I'm going to add a new tab up here for that object as well. So just like that, we've created that database table. And in fact, behind the scenes, it's actually created some scaffolding for create pages and edit pages and view pages. I do have to give it a tab style. I'm just going to pick something randomly here. There's a lot of permissions. I'm going to touch on these later, but for now, I'm just going to skip through these and basically say everyone has access. And right now, we have that post tab. Just like that, we have posts. We can create a new post, and I can say just like that, here's my post. So with those 2 or 3 words, or 2 or 3 clicks, I've created the database table. I've created a very rudimentary entry form, view form, edit, delete, clone. All of that functionality the platform creates automatically. Now, a blog post without any data is maybe not the most beneficial thing in the world. So I'm going to actually add some fields or add some columns to this particular object. So I'm going to go back into that setup menu, and I'm just going to add another custom field. Maybe we will create a rich text field where we can actually store the body of the blog post, just like that. Again, description and help text. Can do that. It's going to have some effects on the UI. Again, I'm not going to worry about some of these security measures. I'll touch on that later. Maybe I'm going to add one more field, and I'll make this a pick list. And this is just going to be maybe the blog status. So maybe we can have things like in review, we can have draft, and we can have published. And again, I'll use that first value as the default, so it'll default into draft. Again, I'm going to kind of breeze through here. But just like that, we've added some fields to our blog. If we go back, those fields are added. We have that help text that we added. Again, configuration, no code. We can go in here. Got a nice little rich text editor. It knows what the field type is, so it's going to render accordingly. Maybe bold this and underline it, just like that. Status, I will say that this is in draft status. Again, we've got post number 1, just like that, no code. There are some advanced options that some of you might think would require code. But we can actually, again, still do that with just clicks. So one of the things we might want to do is re-render these fields. Or maybe this blog post, it's kind of narrow in this half column right now. Maybe we want that to span the whole page. So again, as an admin, I can edit this page layout, and I can really quickly and easily show, let's maybe add a new section, and have that section div, and call that, body, make it 1 column instead, drag the body down there, change this layout accordingly. Can actually add post history, because if you remember when I set up that object, I was tracking the field history. So we have that set up just like that. Again, all of this is being done without any code, so it's just configuration, just like that. We have the body down here now. We have post history. I do need to configure history to know what fields we're actually going to be tracking. So I'm going to go in here and say, let's track every time the status changes. Just really, really simple that way. So again, if we go back to that post, I can really just quickly put that into a published status. And we have field history tracking down there. Again, platform's going to handle all of that for us. We know who did it and when. And again, all of that's without code. We get some additional scaffolding. So we have list views. We can easily create views with different filters. So we can say published only. Go in here and say where status equals published. And now we have a list view that's only going to show those particular columns, just like that. Oops, no, I got it there. So list views, again, come out of the box. Can configure those. They actually have sharing settings, so I'm not getting too much into detail, but you can have different groups see different views. This is what we use heavily when we're working with case management. Different teams want to see different subsets of cases, so we set up views to render accordingly. We also have reports that come out of the box. So again, I enabled this object for reporting, so we can really quickly create a report that looks at posts. And again, we have all those columns. We can throw maybe status in here. Add filter criteria, so where status equals published, similar to what we were doing with list views. Date filters, we can always add some graphs. We can maybe summarize by status, add chart, add some pie charts here. Building reports, again, just like that. Live data calculated at report view time based on data right here in Salesforce. So all of that was created kind of when I created that database object. All of it came without writing any code. One last thing that Salesforce is really pushing on heavily, and that is something called chatter, which is social collaboration. So I'm going to enable chatter for this object. And what that's going to do is allow me to collaborate with other users. We use this heavily in our internal team when we're working on development and stories. If a project manager needs to communicate with a developer, we can go to our given requirement and simply @mention them. And we have all of that history tracked right up here. So I think I only have one user in this org, so I don't even know if I can talk to myself. But what that's going to do is that's going to, one, give you an email alert. You can have alerts set up. But we have all of the history on this record. So it gives really contextual information. For accounts, account management, there may be a support team and a market manager that need to communicate back and forth, and Chatter works really nicely just like that. So while I was doing all of this, I'm showing a lot of the kind of the UI configuration-based changes. There's a whole API that sits behind Salesforce as well, and to some of the other development teams, that's probably what's interesting to you. So if I jump into a new window, I'm going to log into the Apogee API console, which this isn't related to Salesforce at all. It's a team that develops APIs. And they have an API playground where you can kind of test out many of the different APIs that are out there. So, you can play around with Facebook's API. All of these are possible APIs that you can explore. And it provides a really simple web interface. So I'm going to come down here and find Salesforce. It's going to kind of key up the Salesforce API resources. And I'm going to go into
I've got a question.
Sure.
This API is something written by Salesforce, not another third party.
Correct. So Apogee is a third-party company that basically just demos other companies' APIs.
Okay.
But Salesforce has a set of APIs that come out of the box. This is what I'm showing right now. I'm just using Apogee as a mechanism for using that API. I could do it with a command line, any other API endpoint.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As you'll remember, Salesforce is cloud. We do have to log in, so it's specific to each particular instance. If I want to log into my environment, I can do that actually with OAuth. So I'm going to just use OAuth to sign in with Salesforce. You can see I'm logged in as my demo org right now. Since I was already logged into Salesforce, the browser recognized that and logged me in. If I wasn't logged in, I'd have to log in with username and password. But I'm going to grant access to Apogee to use my credentials to interact with the API. So if we do that now, we're going to be authenticated with Apogee, and we can play around with a number of the Salesforce APIs. If it's not slow, and hopefully my internet didn't cut out. So we have, again, all of these methods. One of the methods is a getObjects call. So you can see this is just hitting a very simple RESTful service. And if I do that describe call, what this is going to do is basically say, show me every object or every database table in the system. And sure enough, there's some of the standard objects like account. We have all of the metadata behind that as well. So whether my logged in user can merge these or has the chatter feed enabled or is creatable. So again, this is user by user context because it's currently using my credentials. And just to prove that it created something for post, here is the post object that we just created. So again, I haven't done anything to create this API. Salesforce, as part of creating that object, automatically exposes an API for that object. We can actually describe it, so we can get some additional information about that object. So the first call I did was kind of a global show me everything. The second call is going to be a show me really detailed information on this one object. And we have everything from the fields. So we have the body field. You can see it's limited to 32,000 characters. And again, it's creatable, updatable. We should have the status field. And it's a pick list. And we have the values for that pick list. All of this is exposed via the API, and really any programming language can access this data. Show you another thing, just really simple. Can obviously query. So Salesforce does have a proprietary query language. It's very similar to SQL, but it's not. So there are some subtle differences. But I can really quickly select the ID from post. Can add some additional columns here. And just run that query just like that to get any sort of data directly from the database. Again, me as a developer, I've written zero code at this point. There is some advanced stuff that administrators can do. So again, we've created fields, we've modified layouts, but we can do some kind of workflow actions where if you want maybe a status going into a published status to trigger some workflow, we can, with configuration, create what are known as workflow rules. So again, I'm going to go back into the setup. Maybe I'm going to add a new field here just to make this demo work a little bit better. I'm going to add a date, and we'll just call this the date it was published. So really simple, I'll just add that field. I'm going to add it to the layout. If we did it just like that, the users would be responsible for keeping that data element in sync, which I don't think we want to do. It's more clicks for the user. It's a place where data entry can get screwed up. So let's create a workflow rule. So this is going to be a configuration-based setting that allows us to do kind of programmatic things. So again, I'm really breezing through here, but I'm really simply going to create a new workflow rule on post, and I'm going to just call it, update published date. And I'm going to say run it when this criteria is met. So when post status equals published, let's go ahead and update that field. So we have a bunch of stuff we can do with workflow: send an email, update a field, do an outbound message to an external system, really any of those three. We can also do time-based things, so maybe a day after it was published, we send an email, or a day after we trigger that outbound message. For now, I'm just going to do a really simple field update. I'm just going to say update that published date again, and I'm going to set that date published to a formula, and that formula is really simply just going to be today. So really simply, that workflow rule, when it detects that criteria, is going to do that for me. I just need to activate it, and if we go back here to our post, we see the date published is null right now, but as soon as we publish this, if I did everything right, we get that date published auto stamp. So we can have a number of workflow rules that do all of this, again, for us automatically. One other piece of configuration that you can do is validation rules. So really simply, maybe we want to say you can't create a post that has test in it. We don't want test data in production. I can create a really simple validation rule, call it no test data, and really simply just do a contains, and I'm going to lowercase it, but I'm pulling in that name field, and I'm looking for test, just like that. So let me make sure I wrote that right. Guess I didn't need that second closing bracket. It looks like that looks good, and I'm just going to say no test data in prod. And obviously it's very important. I'm going to have the error message show up on that name, since that's kind of what we're evaluating. And we've gone ahead and added that, that workflow or validation rule. So if I want to create a new post and try to test something, we get that validation rule just like that. So we're enforcing some data quality as well. Likewise, we can also conditionally require fields. So one of the things that we can do when we're editing these page layouts is we can require fields. So just like that, we can say status has to be filled out, or status is read-only. So you can see it, but you can't update it. So a lot of stuff that you can do, again, I'm kind of stressing that point, a lot of stuff that you can do without writing any code. The last thing I'm going to do, and then I'm going to dive into code, because code's my job and code's where I can get really excited. But a post by itself isn't really that exciting. Maybe we want posts and we also want comments. So we need to have a related object. So again, we can go into setup, we can create a new object. Really simply, I'm just going to create a comment object. Going to go ahead and deploy it. Maybe the comments, instead of having a name, it's just going to be an auto number. So we'll just say comment number. We can give it kind of a masking, so we can say comment, then followed by some zeros, and then first one will be comment 1, so on and so forth. We can create that object, so we've just created that database, we've created the scaffolding for the layout, but we need to relate this to a post. So we can create a new field, and Salesforce has a lookup relationship. This is basically like a foreign key in the database world, so it's knowing that those two objects are related. If we do that, we can say it's related to post, and so that's going to actually define that relationship, just like that. And then last but not least, we're going to create maybe another body field. So we have some sort of text area where a user could potentially add comments. Again, I'm doing this really quickly, but what creating that related object's doing, and I kind of breezed through it in this setup, but I actually added it to the post layout as well. So now when we go back to this post, you can see before I had post details, post history. When I refresh this page, now I have a related list of comments. So just like that, it knows that they're related. We can add a new comment, and we can add maybe multiple comments. So it knows that relationship. If we're looking at a comment here, we can quickly navigate back to the post just by clicking on the link. And now we see the two comments just like that. And in fact, we can modify this related list on the fly too. So maybe we want to add that field over there, and maybe we want to sort, actually let's add created date, and we want to sort by created date descending. So we can have those related lists, pulling in all of that data in a sortable order, see all those comments just like that. So again, all of that's configuration. No code's been written right now, but we've already, for the most part, created a posting kind of engine that allows for comments like that too. So that being said, what are some things that we can do with code? Because we can do a lot without code. With code, we can have some more advanced database triggers. So that workflow rule I created where I'm auto-publishing or auto-setting this field based on the post status, really that's a very simple database trigger. And there's a lot of stuff that we can do with that workflow engine, but it does have its limitations. There are some things that maybe you're not going to be able to do with clicks. So we can add advanced code that executes typical database triggers, on insert, on update, on delete. We can have scheduled jobs, so we can have code similar to like a cron job, code running maybe at midnight every night that cleans up data or inserts new records, vice versa. We can have code that's set to execute on large amounts of data. So Salesforce has kind of synchronous and asynchronous processing. If you're updating millions or tens of millions of rows, you probably don't want to be doing that synchronously, so you can write asynchronous code that's going to run in the background as processing resources become available. You can write email service handlers, so we can configure something to accept an incoming email, process that email, maybe look at the subject, look at the body, create records based on that incoming email. You can create advanced UI. So like I said, we get kind of the scaffolding out of the box. It looks decent. It's got some nice styling, but we don't have maybe fancy re-rendering or fancy conditionally displaying things. We can do all of that with Visualforce, which is kind of a proprietary markup language, and we can make this UI look really as polished as we want with advanced development. We can create public sites, and that's actually going to be something that I demo here in a bit, that actually exposes data to the outside world. So right now, I'm logged into Salesforce. You have to have a Salesforce license. I'm only going to be able to see everything kind of within the safety of this organization. But if we wanted, say, an intake form to capture information from suppliers or from something that doesn't necessarily have access, we can expose it on Salesforce sites, which gives it a public-facing URL and public-facing access. We can build web services. Again, that's going to be something that I'm going to demo here really, really quickly. But creating REST or SOAP web services, both authenticated and unauthenticated. So there's kind of different use cases. Obviously, if you have sensitive information, you want it to be authenticated. You want to make sure that those users are logging into Salesforce, have permission to query that data, and that's what we do with EPC a lot. We have EPC creating cases into Salesforce, and again, those are using some of our web services. So that being said, I'm going to dive into creating a very, very simple database trigger. I actually have some code pre-written, but it's really not a whole lot. So this is all the code I'm going to sample today. I think it fits in about 100 lines of code, but I just wanted to make sure I don't mess anything up. Really simple. Here's the trigger that we're going to create. So we're creating a post trigger on post. See if I can zoom up. We're doing it before insert. So every time we insert a new post, we're going to iterate through all of the posts. So Salesforce has this notion of bulkifying things where you could hit one of their APIs and insert 10 posts at the same time. We're simply going to iterate through every post that comes in and reverse the name. So a little bit of a joker code here, but it's something that we can do in code that we may not be able to do with configuration. So again, I'm going to look at that post object. Really simply, we have Apex triggers down here. I'm just going to add a new trigger, and I'm just going to copy and paste that in, just like that, and it's activated. So just like that, I've written my first Apex trigger. I've dived into some custom code, and to prove it works, I'm going to create a new post. And when we save that, you can see the name just got reversed. So really funny. I'm a big jokester. I like to screw around with people. We do this on April Fool's Day in production. We don't, but it'd be funny. So that's an example of an Apex trigger. Again, really anything that you can do in the programming world, you'd be able to throw into that trigger. I'm just going to delete this for simplicity's sake. And maybe I'll actually go in there and disable that trigger because I'll probably confuse myself at a later date. Go ahead and save that as disabled. The other thing that I mentioned we could do is kind of custom UI. So we got that scaffolding for free. It looks all right. It's really easily configurable, so it doesn't take a developer to go in here and edit the layout and rearrange fields. If we want to add new fields, we can do that really simply. But sometimes we want the UI to be a little bit more polished. We want to be able to do more things. So I'm going to show creating a controller. So kind of going back into the web app world, we think of MVC, Model View Controller. We've got the model, which is the post object. I'm going to create a controller, so some programming code to retrieve a post and pass it on into the view, which is going to be a Visualforce page, and show how simple that is as well. So I'm going to create a new Apex class, which is what is going to contain our controller code. And again, I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet here. We have the post controller right here. So if you're familiar with programming, we have the notion of getters and setters. It's just going to expose this post object as a public property. And we're doing a very simple database query to just get one random post and all of the comments associated with it. So I mentioned that Salesforce doesn't really use SQL. It has a kind of proprietary SOQL language. You never have to identify joins in SOQL. So it uses dot notation and the fact that the data model is connecting the two tables. So it knows that the post object is related to essentially the user table via this created by field. So we can traverse that field just by dot notation. We don't have to say, the equivalent SQL would be, inner join created by ID on created by ID equals user.id and then pull out user.name or something like that. We can also do subselects. So this is pulling all of the related comments from that post. Again, you might think of this as like a left join where you're pulling in that comments table. The data model really dictates what we can do with SOQL, but it does allow developers to be really simple. I personally find this to read a lot simpler than SOQL does, or than SQL does. But that's kind of the rundown. For the most part, they're very similar. I'm going to just go ahead and create that class, just like that. And again, if my internet hasn't cut out, looks like it tried to double post, but I got that created just like that. And now I'm going to create a page, which is going to use that controller to pull in data. So I'm actually a fan of Twitter Bootstrap. It's a pretty nice UI library. If I see if I can pull up the little help page. Twitter open source this UI framework. It lets you do some kind of cool, neat things with very, very minimal code. Has a grid system. Really simple UI framework. So I've actually built a page that uses that framework. So I'm going to just, again, cheat, copy and paste here. Just call this view post. So to go through this code, I think I'll do it on GitHub because it's a little bit easier. I'm telling it that we're using the controller is the post controller. I'm actually not going to be using the standard Salesforce style sheet. So this is the CSS that kind of makes it look and feel like the standard pages. I'm actually going to hide the header, which in Salesforce world is this kind of area up here. I don't want to see that. And I'm also going to be hiding the sidebar. Passing in a custom doc type of just HTML. This is just HTML markup. A lot of this is the Bootstrap kind of boilerplate code. So you can see I'm getting the Bootstrap CSS from the CDN. I'm setting some meta attributes. This is just responsive design, kind of typical web development. But then I'm getting, say, the post name and the post status. I'm going to throw that into a custom H1 element. I'm going to get the post body, and I'm actually not going to URL escape this because it does have some HTML markup in it. This is a demo, so I'm doing it now, although that does introduce some issues if someone were to maliciously put JavaScript in their body and things like that. We'd want escape to be true. But for purposes of demo, I'm just going to kind of leave that on because it's cheating. Some additional Visualforce markup, so I'm repeating the list of comments. So just iterating through each comment, styling it for Twitter Bootstrap to kind of have a nice styling. Again, some Twitter Bootstrap badges to show when it was created. Have some custom JavaScript here. So again, kind of real custom development that might need to happen here. And then lastly, just loading jQuery and the Bootstrap JavaScript. So really simple kind of web development, but just showing that that can happen on the Salesforce platform as well. Going to go ahead and save that page. Hopefully everything works. And then I can navigate to it just really simply by, it's in kind of its own namespace because it's custom. But if I pull up that view post page, this is again on the Salesforce platform using Twitter Bootstrap, so really doesn't look anything like Salesforce as you think about it. We have comments. We can actually click into the comments, and I have that just redirecting right back to the standard comments page. Custom JavaScript, so again, when I said we need to do, you couldn't do that with a standard layout. So this is kind of where some of the advanced development really shines. One other thing I haven't really showed up until this point, but since Salesforce is a platform, they have a mobile application that really is kind of out of the box. So I'm going to fire up a custom page here, and I'm going to actually try to render this. So I'm going to emulate an iPhone 5. So pretend like we're sometimes freezing. I don't know why. I haven't had good luck getting this to render. That's a Google Chrome bug, not a Salesforce bug. I can't get it. I'm going to ignore that white space for now. Try to fix that in a second. But I'm actually trying to log into the Salesforce One mobile app. So this is going to look how it would. There we go. Yeah. Worked better earlier. Fun. ignore. We don't want to get that to work. I mean, when in doubt, start over.
Reset that.
Reset. Turn it on and off again. There we go. All right, now we're looking like we're in an iPhone 5. So I'm going to log into this mobile app. There is a bunch of security, so you can set up two-factor authentication if you need to verify with a text message. I'm not going to do that right now, but like I said, Salesforce handles all that security for us. Here I am in the mobile app. So again, we have chatter, displays just like that. If we click this hamburger, we can see other aspects of Salesforce. We can configure this more, but again, I've done no configuration on the mobile side. We have those accounts. So that Expedia account that we created, we can see that in mobile, and we get the mobile layout for free just out of the box. And we also have posts. So if we go down here to post, there's that post object we created. There's the post, just like that. You can see post, date published. We can actually see comments. So we can see the comments of that post. Again, I haven't written any code for this mobile app, just out of the box. Does it just like that. And also, in fact, any of the rules or validation that we've done previously apply to mobile as well. So if I want to test mobile, if I try to save that, sure enough, we're going to get those same validation rules on mobile, just like that. So really cool mobile app. A lot of stuff that you get for free. I should note that, or should state that Salesforce actually does platform releases. So 3 times a year, Salesforce is adding new functionality that, again, we kind of just get for free. So they rolled out this mobile app about 6-7 months ago, maybe. And once they did that, basically any customer using Salesforce got it without needing to necessarily have a mobile dev team or things like that. So really quickly, there's mobile. There's kind of a custom page that we've created. But again, I'm still in the context of Salesforce. So we created a blog that only people internal can see, which isn't a very good blog if no one can read it. So I mentioned that Salesforce has the ability to create public sites. I'm really quickly going to create that public site so that I can share my blog with the world. So really simply, I need to create a domain. I'm just going to see if blog demo is available. It is. So now I have a site just like that. Obviously, in production environments, you can have better URLs than this gross-looking URL, but it's what we get in the dev orgs. I'm going to just create a new site. I'm going to set the active home page just to be that Visualforce page that we just created. So we created view post, and just like that, that's going to be when you hit this URL, it's going to render that view post page. So once this gets created, Salesforce takes security very, very important. So right now, if I hit this URL, it's probably not going to display like we thought it would. So we can see it's trying to render some data, but it's really only just kind of rendering the scaffolding. And that's because Salesforce really wants to make sure that you're only exposing what you want to expose. So when we create that site, it actually creates a user profile that runs behind it. And so what we actually need to do is we need to go in here and say, you know what, we need the site to be able to view posts. So Salesforce does a really cool role-based access control where you can have different profiles applied to different users, and their profile determines what they can see, and the platform handles all of that security. So I'm going to say they can read comments. I'm actually just going to be lazy here and view all, read posts and comments. So Salesforce has really object-level security, field-level security, and row-level security. So 3 different types of security. I just showed the object-level security. I'm going to dive in here to field-level security, and we can see it can view all these fields. We could indicate certain fields as being read-only. And then I'm going to look at the field level security for comment. It looks good. So if we go back to that particular page, running under that security context, now that public site can see all of that data just like that. So we've exposed that to the world. Similarly, if we wanted to create custom web services, the last piece of code I have in here is a very simple web service. So you can see I've defined a REST resource, which is basically just making a RESTful endpoint. I'm defining that endpoint as /recent, and I'm defining an HTTP GET method here. So anytime you hit this particular endpoint with a GET request, it's going to basically just do a query, look for the most recent post, and return, in this case, JSON of that particular object. So again, that's 17 lines of code, including white space and some formatting. But I'm going to dive back into Salesforce. I'm going to create another Apex class to hold this. I'm going to save it just like that. And again, because Salesforce takes security very important, I need to go into that site and add that particular code to the site. So if I go here, enabled Apex classes, right now there's none enabled. But I'm going to say, you know what, it's okay if this site hits that particular endpoint. And so just like that, I've exposed that web service to the world. And I should be able to hit that endpoint. Let's see if I have it. Hold up here. See if I can't find it. So I did a dry run yesterday and changed the URL a little bit. What did I call this? What did I call this site? I called it blog demo. So if I curl that particular URL, there's the JSON that gets returned. I'm just going to pipe it into a JSON formatting tool so we can see. And we can see Salesforce handles that serialization just like that for us. So we have the here's my post and some attributes about that. So ID, name, status. And we have 2 comments. So a nested array of comments where we have the 2 comments just like that. So we've exposed a really simple public API for getting that data just like that with 17 lines of code. So we're running out of time here. We have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to go a little bit more into role-based security, but I think you guys hopefully got a grasp of it just by looking at that, configuring that sites user to add security there. You can obviously do that with internal users as well. So certain users have permission to do some things, but not others. You can configure layouts to look different from one user to another. A lot of configuration that you can do without writing code. But when there's a time and a place, definitely have a ton of opportunity to write code. So kind of closing, I think we integrate with a lot of services and sometimes picking up flat files. We're actually using a third-party tool, Informatica, that really just uses these Salesforce APIs to insert those records. So a really simple integration is Informatica monitors a directory, flat file comes in, it uses Salesforce's APIs and inserts those records. I think there are opportunities to explore where Tool A and Tool B could maybe just use the APIs directly and kind of avoid that middle ground. That's obviously more real time. You get more feedback. You can get, an ID return saying this record inserted successfully. You have confirmation. You can do mapping. If your application wanted to map to a particular Salesforce record, you'd obviously get that back in the insert call and things like that. So that was me rambling for about 55 minutes straight. With that, I think that was pretty much most everything that I had laid out here. But questions or comments or anything that should maybe go into more detail? Or